Thank you, Jane. Okay, welcome back. We move on to 6th Avenue. Simon, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application site up in Cosham at 6th Avenue, an application for 23 flats in a 4-storey building, replacing the former British Legion Club. Members that were on the committee will recall this application in March, when all aspects of the scheme were considered. And in a nutshell, the one remaining matter that members were not satisfied they could approve on that day was the matter of affordable housing. So it was agreed to bring the report back. Before I forget, we've had a reply from Natural England confirming they have no objection to the scheme, subject to appropriate mitigation for the special protection areas, which is secured through the standard legal agreement in the recommendation. But on to the main point, therefore, the outstanding point of affordable housing. Looking at the figures again, as one does before, between publication and the actual meeting today, it's come to light there was some doubt about some of the figures, regrettably. We were double checking the understanding and the presentation of the technical financial matters from our consultant, and there was a gap in understanding, and therefore an error was made with the figures put in front of you, with apologies. So in the Supplementary Matters Report in front of you, the SMAT on page 3, if you go down to the principal column there, and then in the middle of the column it sets out what the now finally agreed and correct figures are, which is with no affordable housing, the scheme would yield a profit of £180,000, which is 4.23% over gross development value. If the policy compliant level of 30% housing, i.e. 7 units, were provided, the scheme would be in deficit by £56,000, which is minus 1.4%. So just reminding members of what the expected profit returns are, as set out in national planning guidance, of between 15 to 20% profit. You can see that either scenario that the applicant is faced with is well below that threshold. So they would be faced with the prospect of 7 affordable units and a scheme in deficit, or providing no affordable housing and achieving just 4.23%. So on that basis alone, the recommendation is in fact at such a low level of profit not to require affordable housing. They have sufficiently demonstrated the scheme can't meet the required threshold, regrettably. And then for completeness, the last paragraph looks at the community infrastructure levy, where the applicant and the local planning authority haven't reached agreement on what that would be. The applicant believed it was right on the bottom there, £184,000. The local planning authority are clear it's £348,000, broadly speaking. On the applicant's understanding of the lower amount, they felt they were able, notwithstanding the low profit, to make an offer of £25,000, which is what was offered for affordable housing. But if they accept, and I believe they will have to accept, that the correct SIL amount is much higher, they are therefore regrettably unable to maintain that offer of £25,000. So the scheme as proposed by the applicant is that they cannot afford affordable housing. There's not enough profit. Your officers agree with that in terms of the final figures in front of you, and so we would not require that any affordable housing is provided. That is the recommendation. So we have a new recommendation, which is to secure the standard legal agreement to mitigate for the effects on the special protection areas as per normal, and otherwise the rest of the conditions and the scheme as discussed back in March.
Thank you, Simon. Mr. House, you're giving a deputation. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. This planning application has already been presented to this committee, as you've heard, on the 22nd of March. A copy of the planning officer's report to this committee is attached in your papers. At that meeting, members agreed with your officers that the scheme accorded with the development plan and were complementary regarding the design, the layout, the massing, the relationship to neighbours, and expressed support for the redevelopment of the site as proposed. Despite that positivity, the application was deferred for clarification around the viability of the scheme and whether the scheme could indeed offer affordable housing contributions or not, once all the development costs were subtracted from the expected sales revenue. The conclusion of our assessment is that the scheme is unviable, as you've heard, and no offer can be made. This conclusion is confirmed by your own viability experts. Despite no contribution being secured, in planning terms, this application is still policy compliant with your adopted plan, as the scheme has been tested by the appropriate means. There are no justifiable reason why planning consent should be withheld today. Viability includes all costings associated with the development, including the community infrastructure levy. This scheme delivers a substantial amount, and as you've heard, it's 348,000 of SIL to be paid when the development is built, which will benefit the wider community as a whole. Clearly, the viability is affected by the SIL contribution itself. During the negotiation, the applicant offered a voluntary contribution of £25,000 towards affordable housing. However, upon reflection, as the viability evidence demonstrates that the scheme is not viable and cannot contribute towards affordable housing, regrettably, the offer is clearly unsustainable and is no longer offered is no longer offered as part of the proposal. The evidence presented by the applicant and verified by your own viability officers and experts conclude that is an appropriate position. This application must be considered on its own planning merits. The scheme has been tested, and the conclusion of that testing is the scheme cannot provide affordable housing, yet does indeed comply with many of your planning policies in your local plan. The officer's recommendation is to approve, and I would ask you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Howells. Members, questions on the application? Comments? Gerald?
I don't think the figures give us any options, so I'm happy to propose approval.
Thank you. John, seconding. Okay. Any other comments? Okay, we shall move to the vote. Those in favour of the officer's recommendation?
That's unanimous grant of planning permission in accordance with the officer's recommendation under the SMAT report.
Thank you, Kieran. Copner Road.
Chair, just before we move on, I know we get reports every so often in terms of what people think the likelihood is the outcome of building schemes, etc., and we have to make decisions based upon that. Do we ever have a chance to look back and see whether the reality is the same as what we've been presented as what we think will happen? So at the end of a scheme, look to see how much money the developer has made in terms of selling off and how much it actually costs to build, because it'd be quite interesting to see if the consultants are right or if developers are actually getting away with murder. Or not providing what they should, I suppose.
I'm not sure that's appropriate language. But, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor, yes, only on the occasions where we have a review mechanism, which isn't necessarily that common. It just depends. As to whether or not how accurate they've been will all depend, because at a certain point in time, this is the market, construction costs, land values, and all the other variables that go into it. In 6 months, a year's time, 5 years' time, depending on the scale of the scheme, etc., when it's actually delivered and returns come in, things will change to a greater or lesser extent. But we do occasionally, to answer your question, do occasionally see when there's a review mechanism how close or how things have changed.
So should we add that in as a standard thing to say that we should review it once, so that we can build up a body of evidence to see if the people of the city are losing out because developers don't provide what they should do? There's an industry that's well advertised on the internet from consultancies telling developers that they will present figures so that people don't have to provide affordable housing. I think it would be quite interesting to see if we are being taken for fools.
Is that possible?
we can't impose that on schemes where there is no review mechanism. I mean, of course, when fully compliant affordable housing is provided, we don't revisit that. It comes forward, but they may or may not make more profit than they expected. On a scheme like we've just looked at, it's clearly so precarious, if I can use that word, that the review mechanism wasn't appropriate, and it's a small scheme. So it's only on the larger, more balanced schemes where we asked for a review mechanism that we'd have that chance. We had that recently on a scheme at Drayton Dairies, I believe, where we did actually find out, and more monies did come in the end, as it turned out.
So how can we ask for a report to look at this so that we could see what's been going on? It would be very interesting and useful I think, for me and other members.
I think it would be just a request that we could engage the applicant later, should they go ahead and develop, etc., if they would be prepared to share their financial sums with us. That would be entirely up to them.
A report setting out previous...
Yes, I just think it would be very interesting to come here as the committee to say, look, this is ones where we've put a review mechanism in, this is what they said when they came forward and we said you could get away with less, and this is the reality of what actually happened.
I can take that away.
Okay, Copner Road. Or a poor dentist.
Thank you. This is an application at 360.
Sorry, yes, Councillor Dent, you need to absent yourself from this. Just to, I forgot.
Yes, as Councillor Dent declared his interest on this item at the beginning of the meeting, he's now leaving for this particular item, that's all.
Okay. Thank you. This is an application at 360 Copner Road for the conversion and extension of existing garage outbuilding to the rear to form an ancillary annex accommodation, a granny flat, in other words, with associated external alterations. Thank you to the members of the public who've had to wait, and we'll have your deputation shortly. So you can see with the Red Edge site, lies on the corner on Copner Road and Alcott Road. So the host property is the house here. It has a frontage parking court that would remain unaffected. There is the back garden. That is the garage outbuilding in question. Residential area, main road, Copner Road. We have a garage access at the rear here, serving vehicular access to a number of outbuildings and garages. This is the front of the property with the drop curb that would remain. And turning onto the side road, there is the garage stroke outbuilding that would be extended and converted. There is the garage access just beside it. This is the west-facing elevation facing the house, so it's on the western side, there facing the house. So on the left-hand side, you can see the layout of the existing building, which is that square there. That is the doorway, the shuttered doorway you saw in a photograph a minute ago. There. And you can make out the footprint of the existing building, so it would be widened both towards the house and towards the road, and a pitched roof put on the current flat roof. So that's the effective driveway at present off Alcott Road. There'll be a window there to the bedroom with an ensuite shower room, a garden gate into the house, the shared garden with the host property, some French doors and so on into a kitchen living room. So the existing elevations, that is the street scene with the garage door and the rest of the building inside the garden. And that would be the new view from the street. sorry, that one, the south elevation. So that's the existing garage door. That would be closed up and so on. So the building would look quite different in terms of being extended, recovered, and a pitch roof put on it. That is the rear elevation facing the alleyway, the garage driveway, and that is the elevation facing the house. It's come to planning committee because we have a number of objections. We shall hear the points in a moment, but in a nutshell, officers have no concerns about the development as an annex accommodation in its own right to be shared with the host property, and therefore recommend planning permission.
Thank you, Simon. Mr. Roberts, Mr. Edwards, Mr. Morris, hello. So you have 12 minutes between you to give your deputation, so if you can sort of work that out amongst yourselves, that would be useful.
May I start, please? John Morris, lives at 372 Cotland Road. And the driveway that runs behind the houses and the land in front of the garage of 360 I own. So I can't see how you can build over my land. And I have the proof here with the deeds if you want to see it. So I'm objecting him to do this. And there's no parking right there. Everybody got the right of way to go over the land to their garages as many times as they want. And there's no pedestrian access there at all. If he wants to have pedestrian access, he'll have to put it on the pavement at the side of the house, not over the land I own.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Thank you.
Chair, I just wonder if it would be helpful to have advice from our lawyer in terms of the where we sit legally in terms of ownership of land and what that does in terms of planning permission.
Noted. I'll come to that once deputies have
Yes,
finished speaking, Councillor.
Can we hear the deputation first? I think that's the normal way of things, isn't it?
Pardon. Good morning or afternoon, wherever we're at. My name's Lee Roberts. I live directly opposite the proposed property at 2 Alcott Road, so the west elevation will be facing directly to my property. I'm just wondering, do we need any demonstration the annex is necessary? Because there are concerns, there are 12 other garages in this immediate area, one completely adjacent to it, which could also apply for an annex, and 60 garages that are actually in the road of Alcott Road that could probably all fall into the granny annex category. The development is connected to 362 Copner Road garage via a single skin block 100mm wall. I'm speaking on behalf of the owner of 360 Copner Road, as he's concerned because this wall should be separate from his property and freestanding, because his concern is if he decided to remove his own garage at 362 Copner Road, there would be no full height wall on 360 Copner Road because it is a shared part of, it's not independent to the property of 360. The owner of 360 also parks his vehicles in his garage and carries out works within. He's concerned that the noise, fumes, etc. may cause a problem to the proposed dwelling, which is directly next door and not separate, and he's worried that complaints may arise from the applicant due to carrying out works in his garage. Furthermore, there's currently a double yellow line running parallel to the existing garage of 360 Copner Road. Will this be removed if this application is granted, as there is no need to have a double yellow line outside the property like any of ours, which would obviously free up a parking space, which is very apparent to the proposed property. As I said, there were 8 objections against and I believe 1 for this. So I'm wondering, you know, is this all necessary? Because in section 6.0 conclusion and specifically 6.1, the chair has approved this recommendation. But obviously, as residents, we now have a chance to voice our concerns. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Mr. Edwards.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I should point out that the statement I make is purely from a logistical point of view, not a personal point of view. I want that understood, okay? I've lived in Alcott Road since February 1976, my house being diagonally opposite the above property, and whilst the above proposal does not affect my property directly, I feel there are other matters that need to be addressed. Since the current owners took possession of the above address, there has been a steady increase over the ensuing years of vehicles either owned by or connected to the applicant, photographs of which I submitted when I came to view the plans at the civic offices shortly after the planning application was submitted. Indeed, on one occasion, some years ago, I had occasion to register a complaint with the owner regarding work being carried out on a vehicle at 1:30 in the morning in the very garage they now seek to convert. Which begs the question, where are they going to keep their vehicles, repair them, whatever, if they're not going to have a garage anymore? As I understand it, and I stand to be corrected on this, the plan is to convert the garage into living accommodation for Mr. Yates and his partner, the applicant's brother to occupy the ground level of the house, with the first floor of the property being sublet to prospective tenants. Doubtless any prospective tenants would be accompanied by a car or cars, thereby adding to an already intolerable situation for Alcott Road residents, unless the applicant has plans to provide off-road parking for prospective tenants, which I very much doubt. In conclusion, should the planning application be approved, it would surely set a precedent for owners of houses 364 to 382 Copner Road who may wish to convert their garages, thus posing a further question. Where would their cars be parked, I wonder? And whilst I appreciate that parking is a citywide problem, I trust that should this application be approved, this will be swiftly followed by the council declaring Alcott Road becomes a residential parking zone. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Kieran, the matter of land ownership. Sorry, yes. Mr. Yates, you're here. You were on my list, but you weren't here at the beginning, but that's okay. Well, okay. 6 minutes, yes, over to you.
So, hello, I'm Adam Yates. So currently the owner-occupier of 360 Copner Road. I just want to touch base on the planning. Obviously, it's been set to be approved by the planning officer. I'd like to point out that the local highway authority, has also seen no issue with parking, and they've raised no objection. I'd also like to point out at this moment that there are other properties within Alcott Road that are also converted their garages to annexes, maybe not with planning permission, okay, but it's already happened, so that parking issue I don't feel is actually relevant. I feel that a lot of the properties that are objecting have already converted their garages, have taken away access as garages. I'm just trying to do it above board and the proper way. Our family sequences, our family things have changed, so that's why we're requesting planning. And I can see no issue with what we're asking and hope that it can be approved today.
Thank you, Mr. Yates. Okay, Kieran.
Okay, further to Councillor Vernon Jackson's question, there were mentions there of private law matters in terms of land ownership, which are not material planning considerations. So whilst they might be relevant in a broader legal context, they're not relevant before the planning committee today. So those aren't matters that the planning committee will be able to take into account, although I appreciate out in the real world they may have implications that all parties wish to be clear and aware of. There was also a question posed, I think, by one of the applicants in relation to double yellow lines. Again, that's not something the planning committee will be able to deal with today, but that's not to stop members of the public from approaching the traffic and transport team in relation to a traffic regulation order to alter double yellow lines. I think that was everything I had to comment on, but if members feel there's anything else, please do ask.
Simon.
Thank you. And the remaining points made. Mr. Roberts, you asked if is it necessary. An applicant doesn't have to prove or demonstrate that something is necessary. Just to be clear on that, it's their choice to make an application. The questions about the building not being separate and freestanding from the neighbour to the north, and concerns about fumes and noise and so on. Again, those are matters for building regulations and so on. We can see a double-skinned building in front of us. It's for residential occupation, so it would have to meet building regulations in terms of the various safety matters that they look at. In terms of Mr. Edwards saying there may be some changes within the host property and whether it be first floor tenants and so on, that's outside the scope of this application. That's not before us. That could happen independent of any other planning application. As for a precedent for conversions elsewhere, each application is considered on its own merits. This one is on the corner with two highways, so it already has some off-street highway parking, which may or may not be the case for most other sites. The Highways Authority hasn't raised an objection because of the small size of the garage. They haven't counted it as a loss of a parking space, and of course people don't have to use their garage for parking. Lots of people don't, depending. That may explain why there's a parking space on the front of the property instead. So there's no objection from the Highways Authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. And it's worth, at this point, particularly for new committee members, we are in the business of material planning considerations, regardless of what we might think of some of the other points that have been made. Members, questions on this application? Judith?
How does the proposed floor area of 24.5 square metres compare with the normal requirements for a one-bedroom or one-person dwelling?
Thank you. One-person dwellings in the region of 37 square metres, but that is for an independent dwelling. So the distinction with a granny annex is that you are sharing the host family, your family's larger house as well. So although you could live in there in a bedroom and a small kitchen diner, as the family member, you're going to be in and out of the house as your family wish, and of course you can also share the garden as well. If someone applied to have this as an independent dwelling, I'm sure the answer would be no. It's not satisfactory as an independent dwelling because it doesn't have its own garden and it's very small. So that's the distinction in terms of size.
How can we guarantee that the person living in here, or worse still, people living in here, are going to be able to access facilities within the main house? I really feel this is the thin end of the wedge in terms of the size of the dwelling, which might be the only space a single person or a couple would have. When we're not in the business of approving substandard slum dwellings, I don't think.
Well, it's not an independent dwelling. It is an annex to the host dwelling. So that is the distinction. And as I say, being occupied by one family, you will occupy the premises as a whole and therefore enjoy a shared garden and the shared main house as well as the granny annex equivalent. So that's the important distinction between a separate dwelling and a granny annex.
Can we guarantee that that's what's going to happen?
We can't guarantee it, but should they occupy that and rent it out to an unrelated party, not living together as one property, and that were brought to our attention, we'd start an enforcement investigation.
Gerald.
Chairman, as I understand the plans, the only access route into this property, if it was being an annex, is through 360. So through the original house is your only access route. Is that right?
No, if the slide comes up again.
So you
can either go through the front door of the existing house and go through into the garden,
oh, yeah,
or
okay.
This is the driveway there, just come in through the gate and in there. So there is separate access.
So, okay, which is, thank you. Okay, that's right. I'm just going back to Kieran's bit. As I understand it, the law in England allows me to put in a planning application on land I don't own. So if I wanted to put in a planning application to build a house in Buckingham Palace's garden, I'm allowed to do so, even though I'm not going to get permission to do it. And even if I did, I couldn't build it.
Well, you might get planning permission, but the stumbling block would be that you have to serve notice on the other person whose land it actually is. So whether in actuality you'd be able to do it is a totally different question. But in principle, yes, you can apply for planning permission on other people's land.
Comments?
So, if there was no access from the road, it would be quite obvious that this is something that is just access through the house and therefore is an annex to the house. Because there is an external access from the road without needing to go through the house, I am worried, and the report says on page, now where is it? Let me have a look. On space standards, it says that it is significantly below. It's not strictly required. Not strictly required means that I think it gives us discretion to say that it is required, that the space standard of 37 square metres is what's expected of the minimum size of dwelling that we would accept. And therefore, it seems to me this doesn't come close. And therefore, with an external door, gives me considerable concern. So I'm sorry, I think I would go with the idea of saying that we should say no to this.
Is that a formal?
I think I would therefore propose refusal on the basis it's falling below the space standard required by the City Council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll just repeat, those space standards are not for a granny annex, they're for a separate functional dwelling, which is not proposed. Mr. Morris, I've just checked on the plans again. Thank you for your comment about the land ownership. I can see where you're coming from. You mentioned that you own the drive. Could you put the plan up, please, Jane? Which I think you mean that little parcel of land between the pavement and the garage.
Between the pavement and the garage?
Yep.
Yes, I own that bit.
Yep. Fine,
Yeah.
thank you. Understand now. The application started off including that land within the application, and then during the course of the application, I think the case officer must have picked it up, or the applicant, that land was excluded. So the red edge does not include that land. So the application is showing pedestrian access across the tiny corner of your piece of land to get onto the site, which is the same as the current garage, actually, isn't it? The current garage has to drive across what you say is your land there. So there's a debate about whether or not there's access over some piece of land to get into the gate there, but of course the property is also accessed from the front as well.
Any other comments? Questions?
There's a question. Under paragraph 5.9, it says to ensure an entirely separate single residential unit doesn't occur, a condition over the use of the annex would be set. And I'm just moving to look at that condition to see whether we're happy with that. And I can't find it.
Page 72, condition 3.
Condition 3, thank you very much. So that's 72. I'm so sorry. Let's just have a look. What page are we on?
It can't be 72. That's about.
We haven't got a 72.
That's about
68
seawalls.
Yes. What page are we on?
So,
Then I'm sorry.
Well, we only got up to
so
68.
have you got the paragraph number, Simon? Because the paragraph numbers will be the same, even if page numbers are not.
Well, the condition is the last part of that report before.
68, page 68.
Of which we've got time limits, approved plans and ancillary use.
That's it.
We all
So
down,
number
page 68.
3, the proposed development hereby approved shall remain solely ancillary to the main building house of which it relates, being 360 Cotner Road.
Yeah, got it, thank you.
Would somebody take the microphone?
Are we all,
With all microphones on.
are we happy with that?
Are you on? Are you speaking?
I found the condition. I can see it's there, which I couldn't find before, and I'm sorry, I apologise for taking time. The question seems to me that we still remain to be satisfied that that's enforceable.
Thank you, Judith. John.
Sorry, just a bit more clarity really for me. 3.1 and under consultations requires, the property requires to be licensed under Part 2 of the Housing Act 2004. Can you just clarify that for me, what that will mean?
Yeah, I noticed that again. I did read the report first time, but I may have missed that. I don't know what they mean. I think they must have assumed it's going to be for some sort of separate living accommodation, a separate dwelling. I think that was the assumption they made there. I can't see any reason to licence an annex building, no.
Thank you. Well, we have a proposal, but we haven't got a seconder yet. I don't know where are we going with this.
And if mine's not going to be seconded, somebody else will need to make an alternative proposal.
We did hear one of the deputies talking about a change to the upper floors to create additional rooms. Is this a future HMO application then that we'd have to look at?
Well, we don't know what the future holds. I think it's going to be the answer. Okay. Where's an impasse?
Well, somebody either needs to second my proposal or come up with something else. My proposal is refusal because I am concerned that it's creating the space standard is too low, and that there is, because there's access from the road, it's an independent dwelling.
Anybody prepared to second? Councillor Vallely? To propose a seconder?
I mean, Simon, could you assist the committee in explaining, again, the distinction between a granny annex and a separate unit of accommodation? Because I think that's at the crux of the nationally described space standards application that Councillor Vernon-Jackson's advocating here.
Thank you, Kieran. Yes, the application is not for a separate dwelling. It is not that. So it is an application for an annex. So you can't refuse something that doesn't exist. They're not applying for a new dwelling. So moving on to the valid questions around its occupation and size and so on, I can just repeat the point. It is smaller than if it were a separate dwelling. Because it's not a separate dwelling, it would be lived in conjunction with the host property as a so-called granny annex. So granny or granddad, whoever it may be, can come and go with the host property, with the rest of their family, use the garden and the other facilities in their house. If it were to be occupied separately, as a workshop, vehicle repairs, a house, then, and a neighbour told us about it, we would investigate and consider enforcement action.
Councillor Candlish.
So the phrasing is that it is commonly known as a granny annex. And I think we're all saying that if it were a granny annex, we wouldn't have a problem, but that we see a high probability of perhaps in the future, if no more, this turning into a separate dwelling which we would be unable to enforce or regulate, or this would be the risk. What mechanism, if any, exists to check the status of granny annexes? Or is there none?
We could visit the property as and when, if this is approved, this development takes place. We could go and visit and check.
Supplementary? Okay. Well, we have a proposer, we have a seconder. Nothing else on the table. Let's move to the vote. Those in favour of the...
So that's the proposal to refuse it on the basis of the NDSS and...
The Councillor Vernon-Jackson, Vallely.
Access. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, just to point out, Chair, this is extremely small, even as a granny annex. I mean, there's no room for any storage around the bed. There's a little ensuite. Where would you put your clothes in that room, for example? then you've got an opening door into an area that's got a little kitchenette in it. It's very small anyway, even as... do we have standards for bedroom size at all for this sort of thing? So you can put your granny where you like, can you?
Well,
A cupboard.
the alternative is you don't extend and reuse your outbuilding, and Granny takes the third bedroom or something, and little Johnny goes and shares with his or her brother or something like that, and Granny or Grandad has an even smaller room. So, you know, this is a use of space that provides reasonable accommodation as an annex.
Well, okay, we have a motion to vote on. So, Councillor Van Jackson, you're okay with this?
And sorry, who was the second? I didn't catch that either.
Councillor Vallely.
Councillor Valady. Okay, thank you. Could Simon and I just have 5 minutes to shape up a motion as it's a refusal against officer recommendation?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, if anybody wants to stretch their legs